He thought he could bully me into taking the fall for his reckless decisions. But what he didn't realize was that his arrogance would hand me the very weapon I needed to bring him down. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. I still remember the first moment I realized how dangerous arrogance could be when combined with power. It wasn't in some dramatic courtroom or during a heated public argument. It happened in a quiet conference room, with a stack of papers sitting between me and the man who thought he was untouchable. Our chief marketing officer, a man who loved to hear himself speak, leaned across the polished table and tapped the page in front of me. "Just sign it," he said casually, as though it were nothing more than a lunch receipt. His tone dripped with that mix of charm and condescension he had perfected over the years. The paper wasn't harmless. It wasn't routine. It was a legal approval for an ad campaign so risky, so misleading, that I knew the company could face serious lawsuits if it went live. The language in those ads stretched the truth beyond recognition. In some places, it wasn't stretching, it was breaking. And yet, he wanted my signature on it. At that moment, my stomach tightened into a hard knot. I wasn't new to pressure. I'd been in marketing long enough to know when executives wanted someone lower on the ladder to take responsibility for their big ideas. But this was different. This wasn't about working late to fix sloppy details or smoothing over an awkward pitch. This was about liability. Legal, personal liability, and he was trying to push it onto me. I could feel the weight of the room pressing in. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, the kind of noise you usually ignore until your nerves are already frayed. My pen lay untouched at the edge of the table. Across from me, he leaned back, arms folded, looking almost amused that I hadn't already scribbled my name across the bottom. The truth was, he thought I had no choice. He was my superior. He controlled the budget. He had influence with the CEO. And from his perspective, I was just a cautious manager who would eventually bow to pressure, the way so many others had before me. But as he sat there smirking, I realized something important. This wasn't just a routine conflict at work. This was a trap. And if I wasn't careful, it could ruin not only my career but also my peace of mind for years to come. And that was the moment the story really began. Because I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I didn't know exactly how I would fight back yet, but a quiet determination began to stir in me. If he wanted me to carry the weight of his reckless choices, he was about to discover that I had far more backbone and far more creativity than he gave me credit for. This wasn't just about one signature. This was about justice, and in the end, justice would come in the most ironic way possible through the very document he was so desperate for me to sign. To understand how this all unfolded, you need to know a little bit about the world I lived in back then, both the people who surrounded me and the environment that made this conflict possible. I was in my mid-30s, and I had been with the company for several years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was stable, and I had carved out a reputation for being dependable. If a project was messy, if deadlines were tight, or if someone else's mistakes needed quiet correction, the task often found its way to me. I didn't complain much. In fact, part of me took pride in being the one people trusted to make things right. Still, there was a fine line between being respected and being taken for granted. I often felt I was teetering on that line. My colleagues were kind enough, but many of them kept their heads down. They weren't about to challenge authority, especially not When authority came in the form of our chief marketing officer, the CMO, he was a man who walked into every room like it already belonged to him. He had the kind of charisma that dazzled during presentations, the kind that could charm potential investors or win over the board in 10 minutes flat. But behind closed doors, that charm curdled into something far less appealing. He was arrogant, dismissive, and utterly allergic to responsibility. He thrived on risk, not the calculated kind, but the reckless, showy sort that let him boast about big swings at networking events. When those risks paid off, he soaked in the praise. When they didn't, well, someone else always seemed to carry the blame. And if you're wondering why no one ever called him out, the answer is simple: fear. He had the ear of the CEO. He had connections outside the company that made him seem untouchable. And he knew it. You could see it in the way he smirked when someone hesitated to challenge him, or the way he bulldozed objections with a wave of his hand. To him, titles weren't just job descriptions, they were shields. He truly believed being a chief marketing officer meant he was beyond accountability. For a long time, I tried to stay out of his line of fire. I kept my head down, did my work thoroughly, and avoided getting entangled in his more flamboyant schemes. But slowly, the pattern became harder to ignore. His visionary ideas were rushed and often sloppy, leaving my team scrambling to patch the holes. He'd vanish when real issues came up, only to reappear once we'd quietly fixed everything, claiming credit for the recovery. The first warning signs came in small ways. A misleading tagline here, a half-baked campaign there. I would raise concerns, gently, diplomatically, and he would brush them aside with a laugh. Details, he'd say, as though legal compliance were nothing more than paperwork invented to annoy him. But as the months went by, I noticed something more troubling. He had developed a habit of pushing risky approvals down the ladder. He would pressure managers to sign documents he didn't want his own name on. A small thing at first, a harmless seeming creative adjustment, but I could see the trajectory. Every time someone gave in, he grew bolder. By the time he slid that dangerous campaign across the table to me, the situation had escalated beyond simple annoyance. He had found in me someone he assumed was cautious, yes, but also someone who had always played along. He thought that made me predictable, and that's what makes this story what it is. His arrogance wasn't just about ego. It was about underestimating me. He thought my reasonableness, my professionalism, was a weakness. He never considered that it might be the very quality that would undo him in the end. In my normal world, before this incident, I was a quiet fixer, living in the shadow of louder personalities. But as you'll see, that was about to change. The breaking point didn't arrive with fireworks or shouting. It came in the form of a deceptively ordinary folder placed on my desk one Thursday afternoon. Inside was the campaign proposal I had been dreading. At first glance, it looked like any other marketing package. Sleek graphics, bold slogans, carefully chosen language designed to dazzle. But as I read more closely, my heart sank. The claims weren't just exaggerated, they were outright false. We were promising results the product could never deliver. Numbers had been plucked from thin air. Testimonials had been massaged until they bordered on fiction. I read line after line, and with each one, the weight in my stomach grew heavier. I knew immediately what this meant. If this campaign went public, it wouldn't just be a PR embarrassment. It could trigger lawsuits, real, costly lawsuits that could damage the company's reputation for years. And then, as if on cue, the CMO himself appeared in my doorway. He had that confident stride, one hand in his pocket, the other carrying a coffee as though he were too important to ever actually hold paperwork. He glanced at the folder, then at me, and gave a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Need you to sign off on that," he said, as though he were asking me to approve a lunch order. I blinked. "Sign off?" I asked, carefully. "Yeah," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Legal needs a manager's approval before it goes live. You're detail-oriented. Perfect person to handle it." I wanted to laugh at the irony. Detail-oriented was exactly why I wouldn't sign it. Instead, I felt my chest tighten. This isn't compliant," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "Some of these claims," he waved his hand as though brushing away dust. "Don't worry about it. Everyone stretches the truth. It's how marketing works. Nobody's going to sue us." But I knew better. I had seen lawsuits happen over much less. I tried again. "If this goes out, and someone challenges it, the liability..." He cut me off, his voice hardening. "That's what we have insurance for. Look, we don't need to drag this out. Just sign it. And let's keep the project moving. The board wants this live next week." That's when it clicked. He wasn't just asking me to approve the campaign, he was asking me to take the fall. If there were consequences, it wouldn't be his name on the line. It would be mine. I sat there in silence for a moment, the hum of the office air conditioning filling the gap between us. My pen was within reach, the signature line waiting at the bottom of the page. He clearly expected me to fold, the way others had before. But as I looked up at him, something inside me hardened. This was no longer about doing my job or keeping the peace. This was about self-preservation. This was about not allowing myself to be manipulated into becoming his shield. I could feel my pulse quicken, not with panic, but with clarity. He had just crossed a line. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Because from that moment on, I wasn't just defending myself from his arrogance, I was preparing to fight it. Once I refused to put my name on that campaign, the tone of our relationship changed almost overnight. Up until then, he had treated me as a background player, useful, dependable, but not worth direct conflict. Now, I had drawn a boundary, and men like him don't tolerate boundaries. The very next morning, he called a department-wide meeting. His voice carried that false cheer he used whenever he wanted to disguise hostility. I sat near the middle of the long conference table, not suspecting what was about to come. He pulled up the campaign slides, clicked through them with a flourish, and then, almost casually, turned the spotlight on me. "Of course," he said, "some people here are a little too cautious. Always worried about imaginary lawsuits. Always holding back innovation." Laughter rippled through the room. Some people chuckled nervously. Others looked down at their notepads, avoiding my eyes. I felt my face grow warm, but I forced myself to sit perfectly still. He wasn't finished. "That's why companies stall," he continued. "Because managers get stuck in the weeds, afraid to take a leap. But not me. I know how to take risks. That's what leadership is." The message was clear. He was painting me as the obstacle, the bottleneck, the one holding back the department. And he did it so smoothly, so publicly, that challenging him right then would have made me look defensive. I left that meeting with my jaw tight, my hands clenched around my notebook. He had humiliated me deliberately, and I knew it wouldn't stop there. And I was right. That afternoon, I opened my inbox to find 3 separate emails from him, each ceasing senior executives. His tone was sharp, demanding, insistent. "Need your approval immediately. You're delaying progress." This lack of cooperation is unacceptable. Each message was a trap carefully worded to make it seem as though I were the problem. If I replied too defensively, it would only reinforce his narrative. If I stayed silent, it would look like avoidance. I sat at my desk, rereading those emails until the words blurred. This wasn't just about one campaign anymore. This was about control. He was determined to break me down until I signed, no matter how many games he had to play. That week became a blur of pressure. Random drop-ins at my office with that same smug smile. Offhand comments in meetings, alluding to my hesitation. Even phone calls after hours, disguised as just checking in. It was relentless. And yet, under all that pressure, I noticed something else, something he didn't realize he was giving away. His desperation. For all his arrogance, he clearly needed my signature. He couldn't move forward without it. Maybe it was company policy. Maybe it was legal procedure. But whatever the reason, he couldn't bypass me. And that gave me something I hadn't had before. Leverage. I didn't know yet how I would use it. But the more he doubled down, the clearer it became that I had one advantage he couldn't take away. He underestimated me. He thought he was cornering me. What he didn't know was that every insult, every threat, every humiliating jab was pushing me closer to a decision, one that would change everything. There's only so much pressure a person can take before something inside them snaps, not in anger, not in despair, but in clarity. That moment came for me late on a Friday afternoon. I had spent the entire week dodging his relentless tactics, public humiliation in meetings, constant emails designed to paint me as uncooperative, subtle threats about my future with the company. If I didn't learn to be a team player, each jab was calculated, designed to grind me down until I gave in. But the final straw wasn't loud or dramatic. It arrived quietly, in the form of a calendar invite. The subject line read, mandatory, approval, deadline, 48 hours. My heart sank as I opened it. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. Attached was the same campaign file, now marked final version, and beneath it, in bold letters, was a note. All managers must sign off on this by Monday morning. No exceptions. Non-compliance will be escalated to HR. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the screen. My office was nearly empty. Most people had already gone home for the weekend. The low buzz of the air conditioning filled the silence. Outside the window, the city was beginning to glow with the golden haze of evening. But inside me, everything went cold. This was it. He was cornering me. Either I signed, effectively making myself the scapegoat for a campaign I knew was illegal, or I refused and risked losing my job. And in that instant, something inside me shifted. Fear was still there. Yes, but it was no longer in control. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. My pulse slowed. My mind sharpened. It was as though the noise of the past week had suddenly gone quiet, leaving me with one clear realization. I couldn't keep playing defense. He had made this personal. He had dragged my name through the mud, tried to humiliate me, tried to force me into carrying the burden of his recklessness. And now, he had given me a deadline, as if my career could be reduced to a ticking clock. But here's the thing about deadlines. They create clarity. By giving me those 48 hours, he had done something he never intended. He had given me the gift of certainty. I knew then, with absolute conviction, that I wasn't going to sign. Not on Monday. Not ever. And that meant I had a weekend to prepare. I closed the email, shut down my computer, and walked out of the building with my head high for the first time all week. The evening air felt cooler than usual, almost bracing, and I inhaled deeply. It wasn't just about saying no anymore. It was about finding a way to turn the tables. Because I wasn't content with simply refusing him. I wanted justice. Real, undeniable justice. And as I walked to my car, the beginnings of a plan began to flicker in the back of my mind. I didn't have all the pieces yet, but I had determination. And more importantly, I had something he didn't. Patience. He thought Monday's meeting would be the end of my resistance. What he didn't know was that it would be the beginning of his downfall. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I cleared my schedule, made a pot of tea, and sat down at my dining table with nothing but a stack of company policy binders and my laptop. If my career was on the line, I was going to be thorough. I combed through pages of compliance manuals, HR guidelines, legal protocols, every dry document most people skimmed or ignored. My eyes burned from the tiny print, but I forced myself to keep going. I wasn't looking for a way to argue with him anymore. I was looking for a weapon. And then, buried in a section about contractor agreements, I found it. A clause about personal liability waivers. The policy was clear. Whenever the company engaged outside contractors for projects with potential legal exposure, those contractors could be asked to sign waivers assuming direct responsibility for any false claims or legal violations. The company had a standard template for it. My breath caught. A slow smile spread across my face. He had been trying to shove liability onto me. But what if I flipped the script? What if I drafted a waiver that placed the liability exactly where it belonged on him? The more I thought about it, the more perfect it became. He was so arrogant, so eager to assert control, that I knew he wouldn't read the fine print. If I presented it in the right context, he would sign without a second thought. The irony made it even sweeter. He had spent weeks trying to bully me into signing my own downfall. But in the end, his arrogance might lead him to sign his. The next step was execution. I downloaded the company's standard liability waiver and carefully reworded it, not changing its structure, but adjusting it just enough to apply to internal executives. Every line was airtight, every phrase precise. It looked like just another routine compliance document. By Sunday evening, the draft was ready. I printed it, slipped it into a folder, and sat back in my chair. For the first time in weeks, I felt a wave of calm. I had something solid, something undeniable. I didn't know exactly how Monday's meeting would play out, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't walking in as a victim anymore. I was walking in with a plan. Monday morning arrived with a heavy stillness in the air. I woke earlier than usual, my mind already rehearsing the steps I would need to take. For weeks I had been reacting, dodging, defending. But today was different. Today, I was going on the offensive. I slipped the freshly prepared waiver into a folder, tucked it into my bag, and drove to the office with steady hands on the wheel. My nerves hummed beneath the surface, but they weren't the frantic jitters of fear. They were the quiet, focused kind, the feeling you get when you know you're ready. The meeting was set for 9 a.m. when I walked into the conference room. The CMO was already there, lounging at the head of the table like a king surveying his domain. A thin smile played across his lips as he glanced up at me. "Glad you made it," he said. "We've wasted enough time on this. Let's get it done." Other managers filtered in, taking their seats. The campaign materials were laid out neatly at each spot, the signature line waiting at the bottom of the approval page like a trap. I sat down, folded my hands calmly in front of me, and waited. He dove straight into his presentation, polished, confident, filled with the same hollow energy I had seen a dozen times before. When he finished, he looked around the table. "All right," he said. "We're signing today. No excuses." The room went quiet. Pens hovered. Some managers scribbled their names quickly, eager to avoid conflict. I watched, waiting for the moment he turned his attention to me, and then, there it was. His gaze locked on me like a hawk. "Your turn," he said smoothly. I reached into my folder, my movements slow, deliberate. I slid the document across the table toward him. "I'll sign," I said evenly, "as soon as you acknowledge your approval here." He raised an eyebrow, glanced at the paper, and gave a short laugh. "Really, more paperwork? Fine. Give it here." Without a second thought, he scrawled his signature at the bottom of the waiver. He didn't bother to read it. Not really. He was too busy savoring his victory, convinced he had finally worn me down. I watched his pen lift from the page, my heart steady, my face calm. Inside, a quiet spark of triumph lit up. The trap was sprung when he slid the paper back to me, smugness radiating from every gesture. I tucked it neatly back into my folder. "Thank you," I said softly. And just like that, the balance of power shifted. He thought the battle was over, that I had surrendered. He didn't realize he had just armed me with the very weapon that would unravel him. I signed my own page, but this time, my signature carried no fear. I had leverage now irrefutable. In black and white, as the meeting ended and people filed out, I caught his eye one last time. He gave me that same condescending smile, certain he had one. But I walked out of that room knowing something he didn't. His downfall was already written. The first cracks began to show only a few weeks later. The campaign launched with all the pomp and noise he loved: splashy ads, bold promises, glossy visuals plastered across every channel. He strutted through the office like a conquering hero, reveling in the buzz. For a moment, it almost looked like he'd gotten away with it. But arrogance has a way of leaving footprints. And soon enough, the complaints began rolling in. At first, it was just a few frustrated customers calling out the false claims in our ads. Then it grew into formal letters from competitors, alleging false advertising. Within days, a consumer advocacy group had threatened legal action. The company's legal department scrambled into motion. Meetings were called, documents reviewed, and then, like a slow-moving storm finally breaking, the hammer came down. I was sitting quietly in a conference room when it happened. The CMO had been summoned to meet with the CEO, several board members, and the legal team. I was asked to attend, though no one explained why. I suspected I already knew. The atmosphere was heavy. The CEO's expression was tight, the kind reserved for situations that smelled of liability. The head of legal had a thick file open in front of him. The CMO breezed in late, as usual, grinning like he was there to charm his way out of a parking ticket. "All right," he said, dropping into his chair. "Let's not overreact. This is just noise." The head of legal adjusted his glasses. "It's not noise. It's a serious liability issue. And unfortunately, the responsibility is clear." He slid a document across the table. My heart skipped. I knew exactly what it was. The waiver. His signature, bold and undeniable, glared up from the page. The CMO froze. His grin faltered. He blinked, leaned forward, read again, and then sat back. With a sharp breath. What is this?" "It's your acknowledgement," the lawyer said evenly. You personally approved the campaign and accepted liability for its claims. His face drained of color. That's absurd. I never. He stopped, eyes darting toward me. This is a trick. She tricked me into signing this. All eyes turned to me. For a moment, the room was silent, the air thick with tension. I kept my voice calm, steady. You asked for my approval. I simply asked for yours. I explained that I couldn't sign without your acknowledgement. You signed willingly. In front of the entire team. The lawyer nodded. It's legally binding. The CMO's composure cracked. His voice rose, frantic. This is ridiculous. I'm the chief marketing officer. I don't sign liability waivers. The CEO leaned forward, his expression cold. You did. And now we're facing multiple lawsuits tied directly to the decisions you made. You left us no choice. The CMO sputtered, denial and fury spilling over. But the truth was undeniable. His arrogance had carried him straight into the trap. The very document he thought would cement his authority had become the proof of his downfall. For once, he was speechless. The man who had always had a slick answer, always a way to spin the narrative, sat there pale and trembling, stripped of his confidence. And I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching justice unfold exactly as it should. ***. The board didn't waste any more time. Once the waiver was on the table, the decision was inevitable. The CEO's tone left no room for interpretation. Effective immediately, he said, each word clipped and deliberate. You are relieved of your duties as chief marketing officer. The room went silent. The CMO's head snapped up. What? You can't do that. I've built this brand. You'll collapse without me. His voice was desperate now, higher than I'd ever heard it. The CEO didn't flinch. What will collapse is this company if we don't make it clear that we hold our executives accountable. You've put us at risk, and you signed off on taking that risk yourself. The legal team slid a stack of documents across the table. Termination papers, already prepared. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had bullied me with paperwork, cornered me with it, tried to weaponize it against me. And now here he was, undone by his own signature. I'll never forget the look on his face in that moment. His arrogance crumbled into disbelief. Then fear. Then humiliation. His hand shook as he shoved the papers back. I won't sign these. I won't. You don't have to, the lawyer said flatly. They'll be executed with or without your cooperation. The CMO looked around the room for support. None came. Not from the CEO. Not from the board. Not even from the junior staff quietly watching in the corner. Every bridge he'd burned, every person he'd dismissed or belittled, it all came back to haunt him in that silence. Finally, his eyes landed on me. Pure venom. You did this. I met his gaze. Steady and unflinching. No, you did this to yourself. And that was it. The once invincible CMO, who had strutted through the halls as though untouchable, was escorted out of the building with nothing but his briefcase and a cloud of shame. His kingdom of bravado collapsed in a single afternoon. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, shoulders light, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt fresh in my lungs. Justice had been served, not by chance, but by his own arrogance turned back against him. It was the cleanest, most poetic victory I'd ever witnessed, and I was right at the center of it. In the days following his removal, the office felt different, lighter. For months, his presence had hung over us like a storm cloud, loud, oppressive, impossible to ignore. Now, It was as if someone had opened a window and let the sunlight pour back in. Colleagues who had once kept their heads down began to smile more, even laugh in the hallways. Conversations shifted from whispered complaints to genuine brainstorming. For the first time in a long while, people felt safe to contribute without being mocked or bulldozed. The company, of course, had damage control to handle. The campaign was pulled. Apologies were issued. The lawsuits were dealt with quietly, cushioned by the fact that liability had been pinned directly on him. While costly, the company survived largely intact because the board had acted quickly and decisively. As for me, I received something I hadn't expected: recognition. The CEO called me into his office a week later. His words were careful, measured, but I could see the shift in his demeanor. "You handled yourself with intelligence and restraint," he said. "You protected this company when others might have crumbled under pressure. That won't be forgotten." I didn't get a promotion or a big bonus that day, but I didn't need one. What I gained was more valuable: respect. I became someone people listened to in meetings, someone sought out for advice. My voice carried weight in a way it never had before. As for him, the once untouchable CMO, his fall was swift and merciless. Word spread quickly through industry circles. No one wanted to hire an executive who had left a Fortune 500 company in the shadow of lawsuits and disgrace. The last I heard, he was consulting for a small startup, far from the stage he thought he deserved. Sometimes I wonder if he ever reflects on how it all unraveled, how his downfall didn't come from an external enemy, but from his own arrogance. I doubt he does. Men like him rarely see themselves clearly, but I see it, and I'll never forget it. The experience changed me. It taught me that patience can be powerful, that arrogance always leaves a crack in the armor, and that true justice doesn't always need to be forced. Sometimes, you simply give someone enough rope, and they do the rest themselves. And in the quiet after the storm, I found a new kind of confidence. I didn't just survive his reign of intimidation, I outsmarted him. ***.